Okay, welcome to part 4 of this 7-part series in supplementation of the book 7 Days to Clarity, A Parent's Guide to Getting the Most from ABA Therapy. If you haven't already, please go back and watch parts 1 through 3 before watching this video. It'll be kind of important since they build on top of each other. You won't know what I'm talking about if you start with this one. But if you already have listened to the other ones and watched and done the exercises, welcome. Today, we're going to get a little bit more comfortable. In the last ones, we kind of built up to, labeling some things, figuring stuff out, getting some clarity, which inherently brings up some uncomfortable thoughts, which is what we were addressing in the last video, video number 3. In this video, number 4, we are going to work on reframing, restating and reframing. You practicing some psychological flexibility in the way that we perceive and take the perspective of issues. Now, I'm not going to be asking you to believe this exercise. It's just an exercise for practice. But if there is something that fits there, that makes sense to you, that might be worthwhile practicing more of and playing with, then I want you to maybe take that moving forward and seeing what you can make with that. So it'll make more sense when we do the exercise. But what I'd like you to do is, in the last video, I asked you to take that tiered goals list, pick a few things that are important, and dump out all of the stuff that you believed to be true as barriers to achieving those goals. And that was probably pretty uncomfortable. And then noticing your beliefs about those barriers is also pretty uncomfortable. We talked about things like shame and guilt and fear and frustration, bitterness, selfishness, big emotions that absolutely can create a barrier to progress, because once we start feeling those things, we go into this kind of like protect ourselves mode. These are uncomfortable and we should stop thinking or feeling in this vein because it's making us uncomfortable, and that's no good. But what's actually also true is that when we can practice reframing those thoughts, which means looking at them from an opposite or new or different angle, then we can also find evidence of that being true. And so when we practice doing some reframing and we start playing with the idea that our thoughts don't have to be taken at face value, that our feelings are something that we feel, they aren't us, that we can trigger other feelings and emotions using different thoughts, parts of our environment, and that uncomfortable feelings go away without anything needing to happen. They kind of play themselves out. That's when we start making some progress, because we aren't always acting on all of this discomfort, and we're instead acting in accordance on purpose with our vision and our values. And we're kind of riding out, arguing with the discomfort rather than the vision or the goal, or the pursuit of the vision and the goal, which is a really powerful place to be, because when you believe you can, right, instead of you believe that you can't, and you start arguing with the barriers to success rather than the belief that those barriers are true, that's when you get creative and you start interacting with your environment differently, and then you get a different result. So the things that you wrote down, I want you to think about what could be an opposite or a different perspective. And you might want to get some help with this, because a lot of the times we can't know what we don't know. We can't see things in a new way without some help. So I would encourage you to talk to a partner, a parenting partner, or a spouse, or a friend, or even your therapist maybe, and practice what could be an opposite. So if you have an idea that a belief or a feeling or an outcome is bad for a person, either you or someone else, play with how it could be good. What benefits come from that? And that by itself might be really uncomfortable. And so that's why I'm going to continue going back to that idea that we need to create space for you to have what you need from the perspective of life balance, having your needs met. So that way, when you start going down these uncomfortable paths, you have not only a safe place to fall, right? And some safety in your day and in your week so that you can get your needs met, but also so that way you have a reason, right? To move forward, that we're not just going to stay in this uncomfortable place, that you can have a little taste of what's good and where you want to go, in that you're giving yourself some of the things that you can give yourself, and then wading through the discomfort that you can tolerate a little bit better because you have your needs met, has more value. It is more possible. It is more achievable from this perspective of overflowing fullness in your energy versus drained and depleted. So please make space for your own self-care. And if even starting with the idea that you can't have self-care is a goal, that might be a really good use of time, because that might set you up for success when you start tackling some things that are even scarier. So that's what I'm going to go ahead and do with my examples, is the idea that self-care is selfish, and we're going to work on reframing that, which we talked, I think, a little bit about in the last video. As I'm recording this, it was a few days ago, and I finished the editing process. I can't remember exactly right now, but I'm like 97% sure I talked about selfishness in that video. So when we think about the idea of taking care of ourselves, a lot of the times parents are going to say, or caregivers, right, parenting figures, that we should actually take care of our kids first. And we've all heard about the oxygen mask, right? Like when you're flying in a plane, you have to put your oxygen mask on you first before you can put it on your kiddo. And in that emergency situation, that makes sense, because if you can't save yourself enough to get it on your kiddo, then nothing good happens there. But it's harder to apply that over a long-term, like non-emergent situation. But how can you taking care of yourself first help your kiddo? How is that going to benefit them? What sort of things are you going to have more space for if you're fed, if you're well rested, if you get the opportunity to exercise, to fuel your interests and the things that you find fun? How are you going to interact with your kiddo differently? How are you going to interact with your family differently? Or how are you going to nourish your family differently? How are you going to care for your environment differently? What sort of energy, personality, the word I'm looking for has to do with like emotions, right? What emotions are going to be there when you're well rested versus when you're not, right? So go ahead and write those things down. What would be the opposite of the belief from your list? So reference your list, all of the beliefs of barriers to being progress towards your goals. And then what if the opposite were true? How could you see the opposite being true? And what evidence can you find to support the opposite? So the opposite doesn't necessarily have to be that, but it's the idea of taking something and saying, like, what would be more helpful? And how can I prove that to be true? What we're basically doing is leveraging confirmation bias. And I think I mentioned this one too. The idea that whatever we believe, we find evidence for. And right now, you could practice anything, even if you just believed it was an exercise, right? You could turn like, how are a dog and a cat related? You could figure that out. So the same thing you could make up something even if you don't believe it. And so we are going to practice the same idea of just letting it be an exercise of how could those questions be true? How could you get creative in the way that you think and perceive to allow them to be true? And then when you find a way to link them up together, how can you let that, if it's helpful towards your vision, be something that you can play with and try out and make decisions about? Sometimes that part, the playing part, can feel really scary too, because we have a lot of pressure on every single action that we take. And that, is it the right one, or is it the most efficient or effective one? And the truth is, we don't know. We don't know till we try. Like a scientist, we have to kind of live an experiment of making choices and allowing them to give us more information. And the more you make space for failure or mistakes to be safe and to fuel your growth and the progress in the process of your vision, right, that you created, the closer you'll actually get to that. Because instead of being, in that fight, flight, or freeze mode, you're going to be in information gathering mode, and you're going to be in learning and growing and applying what you learn and grow because it's safe to do so. You're not scared anymore, right? When you're in this mindset. And if you get to that mindset of being scared or being pressured, just notice it. The same way that we were practicing noticing that possibly the idea of selfishness isn't helping you in service of your vision. So today's practice of reframing and restating, those were some really great examples. I want you to take to your list and go ahead and try them with your own goals. And even if you don't want to act on them now, just writing them out and then noticing them throughout the day or the week, and how, the reframes could be as true as the beliefs, is a really powerful exercise in psychological flexibility, which helps you to come up with new answers and unstuck yourself from a position of stagnation. I will see you for part 5 whenever you click the next one. All right, bye.